Get your black ass away from this entrance. This is for government officials only. Sergeant Kyle Morrison's voice cuts through the crisp morning air outside the federal courthouse. His hand is already moving toward his weapon as he confronts a black woman in an impeccable charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. The woman stops, her expression neutral. "Officer, I am a government official. I have business inside." Morrison laughs, a harsh, mocking sound. His partner, Officer Derek Phillips, moves to flank her from the right side. "Business?" Morrison's voice drips with contempt. "Lady, the welfare office is 6 blocks that way. This is the federal courthouse. We don't process EBT applications here." "I'm not here for welfare," the woman replies calmly. "I'm Victoria Chin, and I'm expected inside for the 9 a.m. federal briefing." Phillips steps closer, invading her personal space. "Victoria Chin? That's a government official's name? Nice try, sweetheart. But we've been doing this job for 12 years. We know who belongs here and who doesn't." The woman, Victoria Chin, reaches slowly into her briefcase. "I have identification if you'd like to verify." Morrison's hand shoots out, slapping her briefcase to the ground. Documents scatter across the courthouse steps. Official seals and classified markings are visible on several folders as they flutter in the morning breeze. "Don't reach into anything," Morrison barks. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Victoria's hands rise slowly, palms forward. No panic. No screaming. Just dignified composure as 2 armed officers treat her like a criminal in front of the building where justice is supposed to live. "Officer Morrison," she says quietly, "you're making a serious mistake." "The only mistake," Phillips interjects, "is you thinking you can waltz into a federal building with some fake ID and a story." Morrison grabs Victoria's arm roughly. "We're removing you from federal property. If you resist, you'll be charged with trespassing and obstruction." "I'm not resisting," Victoria says, her voice steady despite the bruising grip on her arm. "I'm simply telling you that I belong here. If you'd verify my credentials." The slap comes without warning. Morrison's open palm connects with Victoria's face with a crack that echoes off the marble courthouse walls. Her head snaps to the side. A red mark blooms instantly on her brown skin. 15 people freeze on the courthouse steps. Federal employees arriving for work. Lawyers carrying case files. Security personnel. Every one of them pulls out their phones as cameras begin recording. Victoria doesn't cry out. Doesn't fight back. She simply touches her cheek gently, then looks directly at Morrison with an expression that somehow combines fury and pity. 9:17 a.m., she says softly, checking her watch. 43 minutes. 43 minutes until what? Phillips demands. "Until everything changes for you. Before we continue this story, we need to know, what time is it where you're watching right now? And where are you tuning in from? Drop your city, country, and current time in the comments below. Let's see how far this story reaches across the world. Let's connect." Phillips grabs Victoria's other arm. Together, the 2 officers drag her backward down the courthouse steps. Her expensive heels scrape against concrete. Her briefcase remains on the ground, surrounded by scattered classified documents that neither officer bothers to secure. "Please," Victoria says, not begging but informing, "you're assaulting a federal official. This will not end well for you." "Federal official?" Morrison laughs again. "Lady, I've worked this courthouse for 12 years. I know every federal official by sight. You're not one of them." "I was appointed 3 weeks ago," Victoria replies calmly as they continue dragging her. "You wouldn't know me because you work nights. But you're about to become very familiar with my name." The officers dump her unceremoniously on the sidewalk 20 feet from the courthouse entrance. Victoria lands hard but immediately begins photographing them with her phone. Their badge numbers, their faces, the scattered documents still on the steps. "If you come near this entrance again," Morrison warns, pointing aggressively, "you'll be arrested for criminal trespass. Understand?" Victoria stands slowly, brushing dirt from her suit. "I understand perfectly. You've assaulted a federal official, destroyed government documents, and prevented me from performing my constitutional duties. All of it documented by at least 15 witnesses." "Constitutional duties?" Phillips mocks. "What are you, a lawyer or something?" Victoria's smile carries no warmth. "Or something." Federal Clerk Janet Rodriguez approaches hesitantly from the courthouse entrance. She'd been watching the entire incident from inside the security checkpoint. Her face shows growing horror. "Officers," Janet says carefully, "maybe you should check her identification before?" "Stay out of this, Janet," Morrison snaps. "We're handling a security situation. But I think she might actually—" "I said stay out of it." Morrison's voice carries threatening authority. Janet steps back, but she keeps her phone recording. She's worked at this courthouse for 8 years. She knows something catastrophic is unfolding even if the officers don't. Victoria begins gathering her scattered documents. Each folder she picks up bears official seals: Department of Justice Classified, Office of the Attorney General Eyes Only, Federal Prosecution Division Confidential. A young federal prosecutor named Marcus Williams descends the courthouse steps. He's worked in the building for 6 months and recognizes official documentation when he sees it. "Ma'am," Marcus says politely, "do you need assistance?" "Thank you," Victoria replies. "I'm fine. Just documenting everything for the record." Morrison steps between them aggressively. "Move along, counselor. This doesn't concern you." "Actually," Marcus says, his voice hardening, "interfering with federal officials does concern me. And those documents look pretty official." "They're fake," Phillips insists. "Probably downloaded them off the internet." Marcus picks up one folder that had blown near his feet. His face goes pale as he reads the classification level and office of origin. "Sergeant Morrison," Marcus says slowly, "this is authentic DOJ documentation. Classified level 3. Whoever she is, she has legitimate federal authority." "Or she stole them," Morrison counters. "Which is an even better reason to remove her from federal property." Victoria finishes collecting her documents and stands. "Gentlemen, I'm going to give you one more opportunity to verify my credentials before this situation becomes irreversible." "The situation is already resolved," Morrison replies. "You're removed from federal property. End of story." 9:24, Victoria checks her watch again. 36 minutes. "Will you stop with the cryptic countdown?" Phillips demands. "You're not intimidating anyone." Victoria meets his eyes with absolute certainty. "I'm not trying to intimidate you, Officer Phillips. I'm trying to warn you. In 36 minutes, I'm scheduled to brief the President's cabinet on federal prosecution priorities. When I don't arrive, people will come looking for me. Important people. People who will want to know why 2 courthouse officers assaulted the Attorney General of the United States." The words hang in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Attorney General. The title echoes in Morrison's mind, but his pride and prejudice won't let him accept what he's hearing. "Sure you are," Morrison says mockingly. "And I'm the director of the FBI. Lady, the Attorney General is a 50-year-old white man named Robert Mitchell. Everyone knows that." "Robert Mitchell resigned 4 weeks ago due to health issues," Victoria replies patiently. "I was appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate 3 weeks ago. My swearing-in ceremony was covered by every major news network." Phillips pulls out his phone and begins typing. His face goes through several color changes as search results populate his screen. "Kyle," Phillips says, his voice suddenly uncertain. "You need to see this." Morrison waves him off dismissively. "I'm not falling for some photoshopped website. This woman is running a con, and you're helping her buy." "Kyle." Phillips shoves his phone in Morrison's face. "Look at this. Now." The screen shows CNN's website. The headline reads, "Victoria Chen confirmed as first Asian American Attorney General, takes office immediately." Below the headline is a photo of Victoria Chen in the exact suit she's wearing now, being sworn in by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Morrison's face drains of all color. Phillips' hands begin to shake. Victoria simply stands there with patient dignity, watching 2 men realize they've made the worst mistake of their professional lives. "Oh God," Morrison whispers. "Oh God, no." "Yes," Victoria says quietly. "So perhaps now would be a good time to call your supervisor and explain why you just slapped the Attorney General of the United States in front of 15 witnesses." Marcus Williams, the young prosecutor, stares at Victoria with dawning horror and recognition. "Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry. If I had known." "You shouldn't have to know my title to treat me with basic dignity," Victoria interrupts gently. "But I appreciate your assistance in collecting my documents." Federal Clerk Janet Rodriguez rushes down the steps, her face panicked. Attorney General Chin. I tried to stop them. I tried to tell them, but Sergeant Morrison. It's all right, Janet, Victoria says calmly. None of this is your fault. But I will need you to preserve all security footage from this morning's incident. Already done, ma'am. I flagged it as critical evidence 30 seconds after they slapped you. Morrison looks like he might vomit. Phillips has sunk onto the courthouse steps, his head in his hands. Attorney General Chin, Morrison begins, his voice breaking. We didn't. I mean, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Victoria cuts him off with ice in her voice. You saw a black woman and assumed she didn't belong. You refused to verify credentials. You destroyed classified federal documents. You physically assaulted a cabinet-level official. And you did all of this because your prejudice was stronger than your training. Ma'am, please. Save it for your disciplinary hearing, Sergeant Morrison. Right now, I have a cabinet briefing to prepare for, assuming I can clean myself up in time. Victoria begins walking toward the courthouse entrance. Every federal employee on the steps parts like the Red Sea, creating a clear path. Morrison and Phillips remain frozen, watching their careers implode in real time. At the entrance, Victoria pauses and turns back. Oh, and officers? You're both suspended effective immediately. Federal Protective Services will be here within the hour to collect your weapons and badges. Don't leave the building. You're going to need to answer a lot of questions. She disappears through the courthouse doors, leaving two cops to face the consequences of assuming that power and authority could never wear a black woman's face. 15 phones upload videos to social media. Within minutes, #Attorney General Assault begins trending nationally. The hunters have become the hunted, and justice is about to reveal its sharpest teeth. If you can't stand cops like Morrison and Phillips who abuse their power and judge people by skin color, hit that subscribe button right now. Only racist bullies and corrupt officers won't subscribe. Show that you stand for justice and accountability. The interior of the federal courthouse erupts into controlled chaos. Victoria Chin, Attorney General of the United States, walks through security with her jaw swelling and her documents disheveled. Federal marshals immediately surround her, their radios crackling with urgent communications. Attorney General Chin, are you injured? Marshal Thompson, head of courthouse security, approaches with genuine concern. We just saw footage of what happened outside. EMTs are already en route. I'm fine, Marshal Thompson. But I need a private office, access to a secure video conference system, and someone to collect all witness statements from this morning's incident. Already being handled, ma'am. Thompson gestures toward the executive elevator. Chief Judge Williams has offered her chambers for your use. Your staff has been notified of the delay, and the cabinet briefing has been pushed back 1 hour. As Victoria rides the elevator to the top floor, she reviews photos on her phone. The red handprint on her face is clearly visible. The image of two white officers dragging a black woman away from the courthouse will dominate news cycles within hours. But Victoria Chin didn't rise from poverty in San Francisco to become the nation's top law enforcement officer by being reactive. She's already 3 moves ahead, planning not just how to punish Morrison and Phillips, but how to transform the system that created them. Chief Judge Sarah Williams greets Victoria at the elevator with barely controlled fury. Victoria, I am beyond mortified. This happened at my courthouse, under my watch. Sarah, this isn't your fault, Victoria says, accepting the ice pack the judge offers. This is systemic failure that's been building for years. But we're going to fix it. In Judge Williams' private chambers, Victoria's chief of staff, Marcus Henderson, is already setting up secure communications. His face is tight with anger. Ma'am, the director of the FBI is on hold. The Secretary of Homeland Security wants an immediate briefing. And the President's Chief of Staff has called 4 times demanding to know what happened. Tell them I'll brief everyone simultaneously in 90 minutes, Victoria replies, examining her face in a mirror. The swelling is getting worse. Good. The worse she looks, the clearer the message. Federal Protective Service Director James Morrison, no relation to Sergeant Kyle Morrison, arrives with a thick file folder. His expression is grim. Attorney General Chin, I cannot express how sorry I am for this incident. My officers failed catastrophically. Director Morrison, I need 2 things from you immediately. First, complete personnel files on both officers. Second, documentation of every complaint filed against them in the past decade. Director Morrison's hesitation speaks volumes. Ma'am, there have been complaints. Multiple complaints. Against both officers. How many? Sergeant Kyle Morrison has 14 formal complaints spanning 8 years. Officer Derek Phillips has 9 complaints over 6 years. Victoria's expression doesn't change, but her voice drops to freezing temperatures. 14 complaints. And Sergeant Morrison was still working courthouse security this morning. Explain that to me, Director. The complaints were reviewed and addressed through internal processes. Internal processes. Victoria repeats the words like they taste foul. Let me guess. Mandatory retraining? Stern warnings? Probationary periods that mysteriously ended with full reinstatement. Director Morrison's silence confirms everything. Give me the files, Victoria demands. Every complaint. Every internal review. Every supervisor's decision to overlook racist behavior because it was easier than holding people accountable. As Director Morrison leaves to gather documentation, Marcus Henderson approaches with his tablet. Ma'am, the video has already gone viral. 2.4 million views on Twitter in 40 minutes. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, everyone's covering it. And the comment sections are intense. Victoria takes the tablet and scrolls through responses. This is what black women face even when they're the most powerful law enforcement officer in the country. If they'll slap the Attorney General, imagine what they do to people without power. Fire them. Charge them. Make an example. This is America in 2024. Still judging people by skin color instead of credentials. Janet Rodriguez, the federal clerk, arrives with a USB drive. Attorney General Chin hears all the security footage from this morning. Multiple angles. Everything's time-stamped and certified. Thank you, Janet. You tried to warn them, didn't you? Janet's eyes fill with tears. I tried. I saw your name on the morning schedule. I knew who you were. But Sergeant Morrison told me to stay out of it, and I should have done more. You did everything you could without putting yourself at risk, Victoria says gently. In a broken system, even speaking up takes courage. Marcus Williams, the young prosecutor who'd helped collect documents, knocks hesitantly. Attorney General Chin? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted you to know that I've drafted witness statements from everyone who saw the incident. 15 people, all documenting exactly what happened. Thank you, Marcus. That's excellent work. Ma'am, if I can ask, why did you wait so long to tell them who you were? You could have stopped it immediately. Victoria meets his eyes with absolute clarity. Because my title shouldn't matter. Every person deserves dignity regardless of their position. If I'd invoked my authority immediately, Morrison and Phillips would have apologized to the Attorney General. I needed them to reveal who they really are. Officers who judge people by skin color and treat those they deem inferior with contempt and violence. Marcus nods slowly, understanding the deeper strategy. You're not just prosecuting 2 cops. You're exposing the system. Exactly. At 9:43 a.m., Victoria Chin joins a secure video conference with the President's cabinet. Her swollen face fills screens across Washington, D.C. The President's Chief of Staff speaks first, his voice tight with controlled anger. Attorney General Chin, on behalf of the President, I want to express our absolute outrage at what happened this morning. The President has personally ordered a full investigation. Thank you, but I'll be handling this investigation personally, Victoria replies. This isn't just about 2 officers. It's about institutional racism in federal law enforcement that's been ignored for decades. The FBI director leans forward. What do you need from us? Complete background checks on Sergeant Kyle Morrison and Officer Derek Phillips. I want to know every complaint, every incident, every red flag that was ignored. I want to know who protected them and why. Consider it done. I also want a comprehensive review of discrimination complaints across all federal protective services. How many complaints get filed? How many result in discipline? How many officers have pattern complaints that were overlooked? The Secretary of Homeland Security speaks up. That's going to reveal some ugly truths, Victoria. Good. Ugly truths need to be exposed before they can be fixed. For the next hour, Victoria transforms her assault from a personal attack into a catalyst for federal law enforcement reform. Her face may be swollen, but her authority has never been clearer. Meanwhile, in a basement conference room, Sergeant Kyle Morrison and Officer Derek Phillips sit across from their union representative and a lawyer who looks increasingly pessimistic about their chances. "They're going to crucify us," Phillips whispers. "We assaulted the Attorney General on camera. We're done." Morrison's hands shake as he scrolls through social media, watching his life become a national punchline. His wife has already called 4 times, crying about reporters showing up at their house. Their lawyer, David Foster, closes his briefcase with a heavy sigh. "Gentlemen, I'm going to be honest with you. Your best-case scenario is criminal charges instead of federal civil rights violations. Worst case, you're looking at prison time." "Prison?" Morrison's voice cracks. "For a mistake? We didn't know who she was." "You didn't know because you never asked," Foster replies bluntly. "You saw a black woman and made assumptions. You refused to verify credentials. You destroyed classified documents. You physically struck a cabinet-level official. Gentlemen, I didn't know," stopped being a defense the moment you chose violence over verification. As the reality settles over Morrison and Phillips, 15 floors above them, Victoria Chin is rebuilding federal law enforcement from the ground up. The woman they thought was powerless is about to show them what real power looks like. The FBI's background investigation on Sergeant Kyle Morrison and Officer Derek Phillips takes exactly 16 hours to compile. What they uncover isn't just damning, it's a roadmap of institutional racism protected by willful blindness. Special Agent Rebecca Torres sits in Attorney General Chen's temporary office at the courthouse, sliding a 3-inch thick folder across the desk. Her expression carries the weight of someone who's seen the worst of human nature. "Ma'am, this is worse than we initially thought. Much worse." Victoria opens the folder, her swollen face a constant reminder of why this investigation matters. The first page shows Morrison's employment history: 12 years with Federal Protective Services, 47 commendations, 3 promotions. The second page shows another story entirely. 14 formal complaints, Agent Torres begins, spanning 8 years. 9 involved racial profiling. 3 alleged excessive force against minorities. 2 claimed verbal harassment using racial slurs. And the disposition of these complaints? Victoria asks, though she already knows the answer. All marked as unsubstantiated or resolved through counseling. Not a single formal discipline. Not one suspension. Morrison received mandatory diversity training twice, but attendance records show he skipped 6 of 8 sessions. Victoria flips to the next section. Witness statements from Morrison's previous victims. Dr. James Chin, Chinese-American federal prosecutor, March 2019. "Sergeant Morrison stopped me at courthouse security despite my valid federal ID. He demanded to see my real identification and asked if I was here for a deportation hearing. When I protested, he detained me for 45 minutes, making me late for a federal trial." Attorney Maria Rodriguez, Latina public defender, July 2020. "Officer Morrison physically searched my briefcase and questioned whether I had stolen the expensive suit I was wearing. He implied that public defenders don't dress professionally and suggested I looked more like I was here for criminal court as a defendant." Professor David Washington, Black American constitutional law expert, November 2021. "Morrison stopped me from entering the federal courthouse to testify as an expert witness. He said I looked suspicious and matched the description of someone wanted for questioning. When I showed my university credentials, he laughed and asked if they were printed at Kinko's." Victoria reads through 11 more statements, each one following the same pattern. Professional people of color humiliated, delayed, or physically detained by an officer whose prejudice overrode all training and common sense. "What about Phillips?" Victoria asks. Agent Torres opens a second folder. 9 formal complaints over 6 years. Same pattern. 8 involved racial profiling, 1 alleged he used the N-word during an altercation with a black attorney. Let me guess. All unsubstantiated? Every single one. His supervisor, Lieutenant Charles Bennett, consistently marked complaints as personality conflicts or misunderstandings. Bennett is white, 53 years old, and has his own history of overlooking discrimination complaints. Victoria's jaw tightens. So we have a system where racist officers are protected by supervisors who share their worldview. Complaints get buried. Victims get silenced. And the abuse continues until someone with power gets targeted. That's exactly what we have, ma'am. Marcus Henderson, Victoria's chief of staff, enters with his tablet showing news coverage. Ma'am, the story is dominating every news cycle. Civil rights organizations are demanding federal prosecution. The Congressional Black Caucus wants hearings. And we've received 47 new complaints about Morrison and Phillips just since yesterday. 47 in one day? People who stayed silent for years are finally speaking up because they see someone with power taking this seriously. Victoria stands, walking to the window overlooking the courthouse steps where she was assaulted just 18 hours ago. Schedule a disciplinary hearing for tomorrow morning. I want it open to the public and media. Full transparency. Ma'am, Agent Torres hesitates. Going public with this before criminal charges are filed could complicate prosecution. I'm not worried about complications. I'm worried about justice. The public needs to see exactly how institutional racism operates, and Morrison and Phillips need to understand they're not being protected anymore. The disciplinary hearing room in the federal courthouse is packed beyond capacity. 50 journalists crowd the back wall. Civil rights activists fill the gallery. Federal employees who witnessed the assault sit in reserved seating. Sergeant Kyle Morrison and Officer Derek Phillips sit at a table with their union representative and attorney David Foster. Morrison's face is pale, his hands shaking. Phillips stares at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. At the front of the room, a three-person disciplinary panel sits behind an elevated desk. Director James Morrison of Federal Protective Services, no relation. Chief Judge Sarah Williams and Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Director Patricia Hayes. Attorney General Victoria Chen sits in the front row, the bruising on her face now a deep purple. She's positioned herself to be clearly visible to Morrison and Phillips, a constant reminder of what they've done. Director Morrison calls the hearing to order. This disciplinary proceeding will determine whether Sergeant Kyle Morrison and Officer Derek Phillips violated Federal Protective Service regulations, constitutional protections, and basic standards of professional conduct. The charges are read aloud. Assault on a federal official. Destruction of classified government documents. Racial profiling and discrimination. Violation of constitutional rights under color of law. Conduct unbecoming a federal officer. David Foster, the defense attorney, stands immediately. The panel should note that my clients had no knowledge of Attorney General Chen's identity. This was an unfortunate misidentification, not a deliberate assault. Patricia Hayes responds with ice in her voice. Counselor, the issue isn't whether they knew her title. The issue is whether they would have treated a white woman the same way. Spoiler alert, the evidence says they wouldn't have. The evidence presentation begins with security footage from the morning of the assault. The courtroom watches in silence as Morrison slaps Victoria, as both officers drag her down courthouse steps, as classified documents scatter in the wind. Several people in the gallery gasp. Journalists type furiously. Morrison and Phillips sink lower in their chairs. Let's review Officer Morrison's statement from his initial incident report, Director Morrison says, pulling up the document on screen. Morrison's own words appear. Subject was acting suspiciously near restricted entrance. Subject matched profile of individuals who typically cause disturbances. Subject became agitated when questioned and refused to comply with lawful orders. Acting suspiciously, Judge Williams repeats. Can you define what actions Attorney General Chen took that you considered suspicious? Morrison's attorney answers for him. She was unfamiliar to courthouse security staff and approaching a restricted entrance without proper visible identification. So walking toward a door is suspicious behavior? Judge Williams' skepticism is palpable. In context, yes. And what context is that? The context of her skin color. Foster bristles. That's an unfair characterization. Is it? Patricia Hayes interrupts. Let's look at security footage from the same morning, same entrance, different individuals. The screen changes. A white woman in business casual attire approaches the restricted entrance at 6:52 a.m., 7 minutes after Victoria's assault. Morrison is back at his post as if nothing happened. The white woman has no visible ID. She's carrying a purse, not a briefcase. Morrison smiles and waves her through without question. Did you verify her credentials, Sergeant Morrison? Hayes asked. Morrison's voice is barely audible. I recognized her. From where? I don't remember. She looked familiar. She looked familiar, or she looked like she belonged? Hayes lets the question hang. Let's see another example. More footage. A white man in jeans and a t-shirt approaches at 7:15 a.m. Morrison chats with him casually, laughs at something the man says, and lets him pass with a friendly wave. Credentials verified? Hayes asked. He was maintenance staff. How did you know? I just knew. Hayes pulls up Morrison's incident reports from the past year. Interesting pattern here. You've stopped or detained 43 people in the past 12 months. Can you guess the demographics? Morrison says nothing. I'll help you. 40 of those 43 were people of color. The 3 white individuals you stopped were later confirmed to be actual criminal suspects with active warrants. But the 40 people of color? 38 were federal employees, attorneys, or authorized visitors. 2 were actual criminals. The statistics are devastating. Morrison has a 95% false positive rate when targeting people of color, but only stops white people when he has specific criminal intelligence. This isn't security screening, Hayes concludes. This is racial profiling with a badge. If you believe officers like Morrison and Phillips deserve to lose their badges and face criminal charges for racist abuse of power, hit that like button right now. Show that you stand against police who judge people by skin color instead of credentials. Only people who excuse racism scroll past. The hearing shifts to victim testimony. Agent Torres had contacted everyone who'd filed complaints against Morrison or Phillips over the past 8 years. 12 agreed to testify publicly. Dr. James Chin, the Chinese-American prosecutor Morrison had detained in 2019, takes the stand first. Describe your interaction with Sergeant Morrison, Director Morrison instructs. Dr. Chen's voice is controlled but angry. I was prosecuting a human trafficking case. Time-sensitive evidence was being presented that morning. Sergeant Morrison stopped me despite my valid federal ID and demanded additional identification. He asked if I was supposed to be here and suggested I looked lost. What happened next? I showed him my Justice Department credentials, my federal prosecutor badge, and my bar license. He examined each one like he was trying to find forgeries. Meanwhile, 3 white attorneys walked past without being questioned. By the time he let me through, I'd missed the evidence presentation. The case was delayed by 2 weeks. Did you file a complaint? Yes. It was marked unsubstantiated after a 5-minute review by Lieutenant Bennett. I was told Morrison was just doing his job and I should be patient with security procedures. Judge Williams leans forward. Dr. Chin, how many times have you been stopped by white security officers at this courthouse? Never. In 8 years, only Sergeant Morrison has questioned my right to be here. Attorney Maria Rodriguez testifies next, describing how Morrison searched her briefcase and implied she'd stolen her professional clothing. Her complaint was marked personality conflict. Professor David Washington recounts being accused of matching a criminal suspect's description. His complaint was dismissed as a misunderstanding. One after another, 12 professional people of color describe identical treatment. Humiliation, delay, suspicion. And every complaint buried by supervisors more interested in protecting officers than citizens. The pattern isn't just clear, it's systematic. Phillips' victims testified to similar experiences, including attorney Jamal Foster, who recorded Phillips using a racial slur during an altercation. The recording is played for the panel. Phillips' voice crackles through the speakers. I don't care what you say, boy. You people need to learn respect and know your place. This is a federal courthouse, not a damn rap video. Phillips buries his face in his hands. Several panel members exchange disgusted looks. Janet Rodriguez, the federal clerk who tried to warn Morrison, testifies about the institutional culture that silenced her. I knew who Attorney General Chen was. I saw her name on the security schedule. But when I tried to tell Sergeant Morrison, he ordered me to stay out of it. I was afraid if I pushed back, I'd face retaliation. I'd seen it happen to others who questioned security decisions. What kind of retaliation? Judge Williams asks. Write-ups for minor infractions. Sudden schedule changes. Being excluded from important assignments. The message was clear, don't make waves or you'll pay for it. The hearing reveals a culture where racism flourished because good people were too afraid to challenge it. After 4 hours of testimony, Director Morrison calls for a 30-minute recess. Morrison and Phillips huddle with their attorney, who looks increasingly desperate. They're going to fire us, Phillips whispers. We're done. Firing is the least of your worries, Foster replies grimly. Attorney General Chen hasn't filed criminal charges yet, but after this testimony, it's only a matter of time. Criminal charges? Morrison's voice cracks. For what? Assault on a federal official carries up to 8 years. Violation of civil rights under color of law carries up to 10. Destruction of classified documents is another 5. Gentlemen, you're looking at potential federal prison time. Morrison's world narrows to a single point of horror. Prison. Not just job loss but actual incarceration. When the hearing reconvenes, Patricia Hayes addresses Morrison and Phillips directly. Gentlemen, you've heard testimony from a dozen victims describing identical treatment. You've seen statistical evidence of racial profiling. You've listened to recordings of your own racist language. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Morrison's attorney starts to respond, but Morrison interrupts him. Morrison's voice breaks. I didn't think I was being racist. I thought I was doing my job. I thought I was protecting the courthouse. By assaulting a black woman in a business suit carrying classified documents? Hayes' voice drips with contempt. I didn't see the documents. I just saw. What? A black woman where you didn't think black women should be. Morrison falls silent, finally understanding that there's no defense. His training, his experience, his judgment, all of it failed because his prejudice was stronger than his professionalism. Phillips speaks next, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. To everyone I hurt. To Attorney General Chen. I was wrong. You're sorry you got caught, Judge Williams corrects. You're sorry the woman you assaulted turned out to be more powerful than you. If she'd been a minimum wage courthouse cleaner, would you be sorry then? Phillips has no answer. The panel deliberates for 15 minutes. When they return, Director Morrison delivers their decision. Sergeant Kyle Morrison and Officer Derek Phillips, this panel finds you guilty of all charges. You are hereby terminated from Federal Protective Services effective immediately. Your law enforcement certifications are revoked. You are barred from federal employment for life. Morrison's head drops to the table. Phillips begins crying quietly. Furthermore, Director Morrison continues, we are referring this case to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. Attorney General Chen, the decision to file charges rests with your office. Victoria Chen stands slowly, every eye in the courtroom turning toward her. The bruise on her face is a reminder of what started this process, but her voice carries the authority of the nation's chief law enforcement officer. Sergeant Morrison, Officer Phillips, you didn't just assault me. You assaulted every person of color who's been judged by appearance rather than credentials. You assaulted the Constitution you swore to defend. You assaulted the idea that justice is blind to race. Her words carry the weight of moral authority. Tomorrow morning, my office will file federal criminal charges against both of you. You will face trial for assault on a federal official, deprivation of rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. And unlike the complaints filed against you over the years, these charges will not be dismissed, buried, or ignored. Morrison and Phillips are led from the hearing room by federal marshals. Their badges are confiscated. Their weapons are secured. Their careers are over. But Victoria Chen isn't finished. As the hearing room empties, she stands before the remaining journalists and civil rights leaders. This case isn't just about 2 officers. It's about a system that protected them for years. Starting today, that system is being dismantled and rebuilt. The questions she's been asking for 18 hours are about to become federal policy that transforms law enforcement across America. Comment, accountability matters. If you believe racist cops like Morrison and Phillips should face prison time, not just job loss. Let's show that badges don't protect people who violate civil rights. Only people who defend corrupt police stay silent. 6 weeks after the disciplinary hearing, the criminal trial of United States versus Kyle Morrison and Derek Phillips begins in the very courthouse where they committed their crimes. The symbolism isn't lost on anyone. Federal District Judge Michael Chen, no relation to Dr. James Chen who testified at the hearing, presides over a courtroom packed with media, civil rights activists, and federal employees who've waited years to see accountability. Lead prosecutor Amanda Richardson, a black woman and 15-year veteran of the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, stands to deliver opening statements. She's prosecuted dozens of police misconduct cases, But this one carries special significance. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Richardson begins, her voice carrying clear authority. This case is about two men who believed their badges gave them the right to judge people by skin color. Two men who saw a black woman in professional attire and immediately decided she was a threat, a criminal, or worse, someone who didn't belong in their courthouse. She walks past Morrison and Phillips, both sitting in civilian clothes looking diminished without their uniforms. The defendants will claim this was a mistake, an honest misidentification. But the evidence will show this wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern of racial profiling spanning years, a pattern of violence against people of color, a pattern protected by supervisors who valued silence over justice. Richardson clicks a remote. The courtroom screen shows the security footage of Morrison slapping Victoria Chin. On March 17 at 6:47 a.m., these defendants assaulted Attorney General Victoria Chin. They slapped her. They dragged her down courthouse steps. They destroyed classified federal documents. And they did all of this because she committed the crime of existing while black in a space they believed belonged only to white people. The footage plays on loop. Victoria's dignified composure. Morrison's violent aggression. Phillips' complicit participation. 15 witnesses capturing everything on their phones. The defendants had every opportunity to verify Attorney General Chen's credentials. She told them repeatedly who she was. She offered identification. She explained her purpose. But they refused to listen because their prejudice was louder than her truth. Richardson pauses, making eye contact with each juror. This isn't just about one morning's assault. It's about whether we tolerate racism hiding behind badges. Whether we accept that some officers believe they can violate constitutional rights without consequences. Whether justice applies equally, or only to those with enough power to demand it. The defense attorney, David Foster, rises for his opening statement with visible reluctance. He knows this is nearly impossible to defend, but professional ethics require him to try. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened that morning was wrong. My clients acknowledge that. But criminal intent requires more than a mistake. It requires deliberate action to violate rights. Sergeant Morrison and Officer Phillips believed they were protecting courthouse security. They didn't know Attorney General Chen's identity. Because they never asked, Richardson interrupts. Judge Chin sustains the objection, but the point has landed. Foster continues weakly. My clients followed what they believed were proper security protocols. Yes, they made mistakes. Yes, their judgment was flawed. But mistakes, even serious ones, aren't necessarily crimes. The prosecution's case is devastating in its thoroughness. Agent Rebecca Torres testifies about the FBI investigation, presenting the 43 people Morrison stopped in 1 year, 40 of them people of color, 38 completely innocent. This isn't random chance, Agent Torres explains. Statistical analysis shows the probability of this occurring without racial bias is less than 0.0001%. In plain English, it's virtually impossible that Sergeant Morrison wasn't specifically targeting people based on race. Dr. James Chin returns to testify about his 2019 detention, describing Morrison's immediate suspicion upon seeing an Asian face. He didn't see a federal prosecutor. He saw someone who looked foreign and assumed I didn't belong. That's not security screening, that's racism. Attorney Maria Rodriguez describes Phillips searching her briefcase while making comments about her expensive clothing, implying she must have stolen it or gotten it through illegitimate means. Professor David Washington recounts Morrison's claim that he matched the description of a wanted suspect, a description that apparently consisted entirely of black male in professional attire. The pattern emerges with mathematical precision through 12 witnesses, each describing identical treatment. Janet Rodriguez testifies about the institutional culture that silenced dissent. I tried to warn Sergeant Morrison that he was making a terrible mistake. His response was to threaten me with retaliation if I didn't stay silent. That's how the system worked. Good people stayed quiet because bad people held power. The most powerful testimony comes from Victoria Chin herself. Prosecutor Richardson guides her through the events methodically. Victoria describes arriving at the courthouse, approaching the entrance, Morrison's immediate hostility. He didn't ask for identification, Victoria explains calmly. He didn't inquire about my purpose. He saw a black woman and immediately decided I was a problem to be removed. What went through your mind when he slapped you? Victoria pauses, touching her face where the bruise has faded but the memory remains fresh. I thought about every black woman who's been assaulted by people in authority and had no recourse. Every woman who couldn't fight back because she lacked power or resources. I decided that if this happened to me, the Attorney General, I would use my position to ensure it never happened to anyone else. Did you resist when they dragged you down the steps? No. Resisting would have given them justification for escalating violence. I maintained my dignity and documented everything. I knew justice would come, but it had to come through the system, not despite it. Richardson displays the photos Victoria took. Morrison's badge number, Phillips' face, the scattered classified documents. Why did you take these photographs? Because I've prosecuted enough civil rights cases to know that without documentation, victims are dismissed as exaggerating or lying. I wanted irrefutable evidence of exactly what happened. Defense Attorney Foster cross-examines with visible reluctance. Attorney General Chin, isn't it true you could have immediately identified yourself and prevented this entire incident? Victoria meets his eyes with steel in her voice. Mr. Foster, are you suggesting that I needed to prove my humanity before deserving basic dignity? That black women must carry identification proving we're important enough to be treated with respect. Foster backpedals quickly. I'm simply asking. You're asking why I didn't make it easy for officers who refuse to do their jobs properly. You're asking why I didn't rescue them from their own prejudice. The answer is simple. It's not my responsibility to protect racist officers from the consequences of their racism. The courtroom erupts in applause. Judge Chin gavels for order, but the message has been delivered. Morrison takes the stand in his own defense, a desperate move by his attorney. Sergeant Morrison, Foster begins, did you intentionally target Attorney General Chen because of her race? No, sir. I would never. Prosecutor Richardson interrupts during cross-examination. Then explain why you let 3 white people pass that same entrance without verification while detaining Attorney General Chen. I recognized those individuals. You recognized them? From where? Morrison hesitates. They looked familiar. They looked familiar because they looked like you expected authority to look. What? Correct. No, that's not. Richardson pulls up Morrison's own incident reports. In 8 years, you've never detained a white person who turned out to be legitimately authorized. But you've detained 40 people of color, 38 of whom were authorized. How do you explain that disparity? I don't know. You don't know? Or you don't want to admit that you racially profile people every single day? Morrison's silence is admission enough. Phillips doesn't testify. His attorney knows the recording of him using racial slurs would be replayed during cross-examination, destroying any credibility. Closing arguments take 2 hours. Richardson systematically destroys every defense argument, showing that Morrison and Phillips had numerous opportunities to avoid this outcome, if only their training had been stronger than their prejudice. The jury deliberates for 3 hours and 17 minutes. When they return, the forewoman's voice is steady and certain. On the charge of assault on a federal official, guilty. Morrison's wife begins crying in the gallery. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, guilty. Phillips drops his head to the table. On the charge of destruction of government property, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, guilty. 4 guilty verdicts on all counts for both defendants. Judge Chin sets sentencing for 2 weeks later, denying bail. Morrison and Phillips are remanded to federal custody immediately. As marshals lead them away in handcuffs, Morrison looks back at his wife with desperate eyes. Phillips walks like a man already dead. The courthouse steps where Victoria was assaulted become the site of her victory press conference. Hit subscribe if you believe Morrison and Phillips deserve every year they get in prison. Show that racist cops must face real consequences, not just paid leave and transfers. Only people who defend corrupt police won't subscribe. Choose your side. Sentencing day arrives with media coverage that rivals Supreme Court decisions. Judge Chin has reviewed extensive pre-sentencing reports. Morrison and Phillips' attorneys have filed desperate motions for leniency, citing their families, their service records, their remorse. Victoria Chin sits in the front row once again, her presence a reminder of why this matters. Sergeant Kyle Morrison, Judge Chin begins, you served in law enforcement for 12 years. You took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Instead, you violated it repeatedly. You targeted people based on race. You assaulted a federal official. You destroyed the trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Morrison stands, shoulders shaking. Your pre-sentencing report shows minimal acceptance of responsibility. Your statement claims you were doing your job and made an honest mistake. But the evidence shows this wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern spanning years. Judge Chen's voice grows harder. You are sentenced to 6 years in federal prison on the assault charge, to run consecutively with 4 years on the civil rights violation. Total sentence, 10 years followed by 3 years supervised release. Morrison collapses. His attorney catches him as he falls. Officer Derek Phillips, Judge Chin continues, your participation was equally culpable. You assisted in the assault, participated in the racial profiling, and your use of racial slurs demonstrates deep-seated prejudice. You are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. Phillips takes the sentence in silence, already broken. Furthermore, Judge Chin adds, both defendants are ordered to pay $250,000 in restitution to Attorney General Chin and to participate in intensive anti-racism education during their incarceration. As Morrison and Phillips are led away to begin their sentences, Victoria stands before the assembled media. This verdict sends a clear message. Badges don't grant immunity from justice. Officers who violate civil rights will face consequences. And the system that protected them is being dismantled. Reporter questions come rapid fire. Attorney General Chin, do you believe 10 years is sufficient? I believe justice is about more than punishing individuals. It's about transforming systems. Morrison and Phillips will serve appropriate time, but my focus is on ensuring this never happens again. What reforms are you implementing? Victoria's smile carries satisfaction. I'm glad you asked. She pulls out a document titled, The Federal Accountability and Reform Initiative, her response to years of institutional racism. Effective immediately, all federal law enforcement agencies will implement the following changes. First, independent civilian oversight boards with subpoena power to investigate discrimination complaints. No more internal investigations protecting bad officers. Second, mandatory body cameras for all federal officers with severe penalties for malfunctions during critical incidents. Third, pattern and practice investigations of any officer with more than 2 discrimination complaints. 3 complaints trigger automatic suspension pending review. Fourth, elimination of qualified immunity for federal officers in civil rights cases. Officers who violate rights face personal liability. Fifth, diversity requirements for federal law enforcement. Agencies must reflect the communities they serve within 18 months. Sixth, annual anti-bias training designed and evaluated by independent civil rights organizations, not law enforcement agencies protecting their own. The reforms are sweeping, comprehensive, and designed to prevent another Morrison or Phillips from hiding behind a badge. Within weeks, implementation begins across federal agencies. The FBI launches pattern and practice reviews of 247 agents with multiple complaints. 43 are immediately suspended. 17 are terminated. Federal Protective Services fires 89 officers with discrimination complaint histories. Another 156 are placed on probation. The Department of Homeland Security implements body camera requirements across all agencies. Malfunctions drop from 34% of critical incidents to 0.3% once officers realize cameras protect good cops and expose bad ones. 6 months after Victoria's assault, the transformation is measurable. Discrimination complaints filed against federal officers increased by 67%, not because discrimination is rising, but because victims finally believe they'll be heard. Sustained complaints, those resulting in discipline, jumped from 8% to 71%. Officers can no longer rely on supervisors to bury allegations. Federal law enforcement diversity improves dramatically. Recruitment from historically black colleges increases 340%. Hispanic representation in federal agencies grows from 12% to 23%. Most importantly, use of force incidents against people of color dropped by 41% as officers realize they're being monitored, recorded, and held accountable. Morrison and Phillips become cautionary tales studied in every federal law enforcement academy. Their mugshots appear in training materials with the caption, "This is what happens when prejudice overpowers professionalism." Morrison serves his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. His wife divorces him after 2 years. His children refuse to visit. He's attacked twice by inmates who view assaulting the Attorney General as particularly egregious. Phillips serves his time in a different facility, working in the prison laundry for 23 cents per hour. The man who once wielded authority now takes orders from corrections officers who treat him with the same contempt he showed to people of color. Both men are released after serving 85% of their sentences. Morrison after 8.5 years, Phillips after 6 years and 9 months. They emerge into a world that remembers exactly who they are. Morrison applies for 143 jobs in 2 years. He receives 3 interviews, 0 offers. His federal conviction and notorious reputation make him unemployable. He eventually finds work at a car wash, earning minimum wage and living in a studio apartment. The confident officer who once controlled courthouse access now watches life from the margins, experiencing the powerlessness he once inflicted on others. Phillips moves to a different state, changes his name, and tries to disappear. But the internet never forgets. A background check reveals his identity. His new employer fires him immediately. He ends up working overnight security at a warehouse, the only employer willing to hire a disgraced former cop. The irony of providing security after being convicted of assault isn't lost on him. Meanwhile, Victoria Chen's influence extends far beyond criminal justice reform. She's reappointed to a second term as Attorney General, becoming the longest-serving AG in modern history. Her Civil Rights Division brings 847 cases against discriminatory officers, winning 803. The reforms she implemented become national models. 12 states adopt similar civilian oversight systems. Body camera requirements spread to local police departments. Qualified immunity faces serious legal challenges for the first time in decades. But Victoria's most important work happens in moments the public doesn't see. She personally responds to letters from people of color sharing their experiences with discriminatory policing. She visits communities that have suffered decades of abuse. She meets with mothers whose children were killed by officers who faced no consequences. And she never forgets the morning she stood on courthouse steps, being dragged away by men who couldn't imagine that a black woman could be more powerful than they were. 10 years after the assault, Victoria Chen stands in the same spot where Morrison slapped her. The courthouse has installed a plaque marking the location. On this spot, Attorney General Victoria Chen was assaulted by federal officers who judged her by race rather than credentials. Her pursuit of justice transformed federal law enforcement and reminded America that dignity is not negotiable. March 17, 2024. Victoria touches the plaque gently, remembering the woman she was that morning, calm, dignified, absolutely certain that justice would prevail. A young black woman approaches hesitantly, wearing a Federal Protective Services uniform with a trainee badge. "Attorney General Chen? I'm Officer Jasmine Williams. I just wanted to thank you. I'm the first black woman in my family to work in federal law enforcement, and it's because of the changes you made." Victoria smiles warmly. "You don't need to thank me. You earned your position through merit and dedication. I just removed the barriers that shouldn't have existed in the first place." "Still," Jasmine says, "knowing that someone like me can wear this badge without being judged by my skin color, that's because of you." As Jasmine returns to her post, Victoria reflects on the journey from victim to victor, from assault to transformation. Morrison and Phillips thought they were removing an unwanted presence from their courthouse. Instead, they triggered a revolution in federal law enforcement that protected millions of people from the same treatment. Their prejudice became the catalyst for justice. Their assumptions became their downfall. Their badges, which they wielded like weapons, became symbols of what happens when authority lacks accountability. The woman they judged as powerless showed them what real power looks like, not the power to harm but the power to heal. Not the power to destroy individuals, but the power to transform systems. Victoria Chen didn't just defeat 2 racist cops. She dismantled the infrastructure that created and protected them. And every officer who now thinks twice before judging someone by appearance, every person of color who files a complaint and actually gets heard, every family that receives justice instead of excuses, they're all living proof that dignity, when defended by those with power, can change the world. Tap that like button if this story proves that accountability and justice can triumph over racism when people with power refuse to stay silent. Show that you stand with victims who fight back against corrupt systems. Only people who accept injustice as normal scroll past without engaging. Asterisk asterisk. Have you witnessed discrimination disguised as just doing my job? Share your experience in the comments below. Your voice matters. Your story creates change. These real-life stories remind us that justice isn't automatic. It requires courage from those who've been wronged and accountability for those who do wrong. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. Every week, Blissful Whispers brings you stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of courage overcoming prejudice, and of justice defeating those who thought they were untouchable. Tell us, have you or someone you know faced discrimination from those in authority? Drop your experience in the comments. Your story could inspire our next powerful narrative. Because when we shine light on injustice, we make it harder for darkness to hide. And sometimes the person others underestimate most holds more power than anyone imagined. The story you just heard wasn't softened or sanitized. It was told exactly as it needed to be, raw, honest, and real. At Blissful Whispers, we believe that's the only way truth can breathe. If you felt something, hit like, drop a comment sharing your reaction, and subscribe so you never miss the voices that refuse to be silenced. Every story we share carries the weight of real experiences, real struggles, and real victories. Join our community of people who believe dignity isn't negotiable and justice isn't optional. Thank you for watching Blissful Whispers, where every voice matters, where every story counts, where truth speaks louder than silence.